Okay. Got your text?
Yeah, give me once. We're up to,
We're on page 183,
oh,
and it's so you there?
yeah, we were talking about evil, I think. Some,
Yeah, so we had just gotten to this point that let me see from where I should start reading. So he says, if in fact what is purified were good before its loss of purity, purification alone would be sufficient. But if purification is going to be sufficient, what remains after it will be the good, not the purification. But
hmm
the soul is not, as we know by its nature, good, but something that can participate in the good and is within the class of the good, for otherwise it would not have come to be in an evil state. The good for it then consists in uniting itself with what has engendered it, while evil lies in uniting itself to what is inferior to it. Right? So this is, we saw that there's some confusion here because he at the beginning seems to be using purification both for the process and the state, but later now here at the end, here in the middle of the argument, he seems to be using purification just for the state. And he's making this argument that purification isn't sufficient because um, since we are really responsible for the evil we do, that means that we are not something that's by nature good, otherwise we couldn't really be responsible for evils. But we are just something that's capable of the good. So, besides purification and the virtues that are purifications, we're going to need another set of virtues, right? And he brings in then also this idea that um, to what is good is to turn to your cause. Again, why? Because to be good is to be maximally what you are. And since your being comes from your cause, for you to be maximally what you are, you should turn to it. And the opposite of that is turning towards your effects. So like being attached to your products. Um, and that then is the reason why this should be evil, I think, is since these are things that depend on you, they can't actually, and they're definitely not your causes, and therefore they can't actually help you become a better you. They just and so they won't contribute to your moral and existential development. Um, and for that reason, it's wrong to unite yourself with the things that are inferior to you or that are somehow caused by you. Um, so this also, this is the background to this is just philosophical contempt for productive classes and merchants and things because artisans and so on, they're attached to the things that they produce. And, there might be some kind of also criticism of procreation here, kind of, and insofar as it's connected to procreation, to sex. So, and, although it wasn't the case that every Platonic philosopher was celibate, some very extreme ones were. Like, um, as far as I remember, Plotinus was, although he adopted many children, and Porphyry had a wife. He has a letter to her, but Proclus was also celibate. But anyway, all these are things where perhaps there's some kind of attachment to your products that shouldn't happen. The good philosopher is just turned towards his causes and never towards his effects. Porphyry also, when he's talking about the life of Plotinus, we saw how he emphasized that Plotinus didn't even care about what he was producing, what he was saying or writing, and so
hmm.
on. So that's as far as we got. I think,
Yeah,
and
something like that.
so you can start reading from there.
Is this like to do with the kind of idea of Aristotle, like if your productive art has the end and the thing it produces, and therefore the end the product is like before the activity, and therefore it's not you're like subjecting yourself to the object or something like that, the artifact.
Right, and like it will never be an end in itself, right? That doing that activity will never be an end in itself. Whereas like um the Neoplatonists then you know they use the model of like the sun and walking and producing footsteps in the sand in part to explain how even if you are doing just something that's an end in itself, you can also produce, right? So Plotinus is contemplating and then he automatically like teaches, but um it just happens accidentally. He doesn't have to pay attention to it. But yeah, that's also part of it. Although I don't think that's the whole issue for the Neoplatonists, because the Aristotelian argument isn't enough to explain why uniting yourself to something below yourself is evil, right?
Right, it would make more sense to say, like, when you talk about your own effects, it starts sounding weird, and we get into all these things. Like, if you would say uniting yourself to something like lower things in general, or I don't know, maybe like things that are not even like, I'm just thinking of how make that make sense. Like, if you say something like, hmm, I don't know, uniting yourself to, I don't know, to
Well,
money. Well, you could always, it always becomes things that are your product, but it's, hmm, is it like this is maybe a question for people that think that, or I guess we think that it's good to care for your children, for example. Then why do we denigrate people who care for their money, which is just sort of their children, right?
right. Well, I think so. Like, so Plotinus didn't have his own children, but he did care for children. So caring for children shouldn't be opposed to the good life here, and not even to the best life, since Plotinus had a god for a daimon. I think part of the idea of the children is that they can become human beings and they can become equals in some sense.
Okay.
Uh, it's
So
you have
maybe
to see it
you
in
would say I'm not caring for my children as my product, but as something like potential humans
potential.
who are higher than me,
Yeah,
or I don't know, or the same.
yeah, or could even become better people than I am. And also, like, I guess uh, part of what the Platonists could say, if you love your children as your product, then you're not going to love them properly, right? Um, because then you're just loving them as bodies, even, right? Whereas each of them has this they have a soul or life of their own that you do not generate, things like that.
Yeah, but I mean, we had the discussions about providence, like the higher things always care about the things they produce, but then, and that's not a good thing, like, or we call that some kind of byproduct, really.
Yeah, so that is an issue. So I think like different Neoplatonists will have different explanations about this, but for um but yeah, they all try to avoid saying that they pay attention to the lower things. So Proclus puts providence in the gods, right? So at the level of the one. And for him, that's the solution. He says, you can either have this Aristotelian God that doesn't care about anything, or you can have this Stoic God that cares about everything, but then he's mixed up with the world. what's the intermediate? He says, well, if um, you have these gods, and each of them is by nature good. So just being what it is, being like a value, it makes other things valuable, and it doesn't have to actually care directly for them. So that's Proclus's view. And then when he talks about also like providence in the sense of nous organizing everything, he says, well, again, nous just has, all the forms in it. And so it's actually just contemplating itself, contemplating the forms, and then things are organized according to that. Um, and so he always tries to do that. Plotinus, he puts like the effort of providence, of like organizing the world and taking care of it, really on all on the level of soul. And it seems that, well, in what sense then does like nous and the good, do they exercise providence? It's just in the sense that they are like they remain in themselves as these models that soul imitates when it organizes the world. But so for him, it's there's Proclus manages to give more of a sense of like the gods producing good in the world, although they're just in some sense producing themselves, like producing participation in themselves, but still there's some kind of connection here. Whereas for Plotinus, providence is more a question just of the expression of the automatic expression of nous through the soul. And that also reflects in this idea, in this difference that for Plotinus, matter is evil, whereas for Proclus, it's not evil, it's just an instrument, and it's neither good nor evil in itself.
And because I didn't get the last thing.
Well, well, because Proclus is concerned to say that there are gods acting at every level of being, and so there is even gods that are proper to the even the sublunar world, even to the um, center of the earth with its chaotic elements. There are gods responsible for that. So since there are gods responsible for every kind of thing, there's going to be goodness proper to every kind of thing. And also he rejects the Platonian position because he thinks it leads to dualism of some kind.
Yeah, but you were saying that so that's why the gods themselves have providence even in this world. But Plotinus would not say that.
Plotinus would not say that. Plotinus attributes providence just to the level of soul, and insofar as it is something done by nous or unity itself, it's this kind of automatic thing where nous and unity itself just are remain in themselves, and as a secondary activity, order is or goodness is produced.
Yeah, there isn't like okay, that's different. They're both. I don't get what does it mean to say that like so the soul is bad because it cares about the world in some sense, or
Yeah, so bad souls are souls that attach themselves and see the things in this world as themselves goods instead of knowing their own value and knowing the value of the things above them. Yeah, for Plotinus. This world is good because it is a great image of nous. So he's not agnostic in that sense, but we shouldn't be attached to anything here unless it's like an image of higher things, and then what you're really valuing is the higher things.
and so back to the gods or whoever has providence for this world. Do they or
It's ambiguous for Plotinus. I mean, sometimes he thinks that he describes us as like some mistake on the part of the soul. Sometimes he describes even, like the production of nous as some kind of error, and sometimes he thinks that no, he has this more a picture that the soul is just contemplating the higher things, and this world get matter gets formed automatically. But no, like in the sense of that there is some higher agent that thinks of us and the things in this world lovingly as or like in the sense of like having an intention towards us qua us. No, I don't think you find that in Neoplatonism in general. Right? They try to have they try to have Aristotle's self-concerned God and yet explain how this self-concerned God also has a providential positive effect on other things, without having to have it directly think about the thing about worse things.
Hmm.
So they want like the best of both worlds. So they want direct action without intention. So, because the problem of the Aristotelian picture is that, the God just knows himself, and then that's a model that the heavens imitate, and then because of the orderliness of the heavens, you get orderliness down here. Um, so it's only an indirect effect of the first unmoved mover that there are good things and there's order down here. Whereas, so the Platonists want to say, no, it's a direct effect. But at the same time, they don't want the Stoic result that God actually pays attention to things down here and is therefore mixed with the things down here. So they want direct action, they want causality and responsibility and on this part of the God without there being any intention or mixture.
Why is the like practice solution so different from Aristotle's solution, whereas God is like the final cause of the heavens goodness or something like that, and it's the heavens imitating God, not
Um, well, um, it's Proclus. I think Proclus exaggerates his difference from Aristotle, but he does argue that if something is a final cause, it's also a productive cause. And so he thinks that Aristotle thinks that the first mover is only a final cause, whereas Proclus says no, it has to be also responsible for the existence of the things that imitate it. And because of that, it then and also the activity goes beyond the heavens. Um, so, but there were Aristotelians who thought that actually Aristotle's first unmoved mover is also an efficient cause because, for instance, it causes the knowledge of itself and the things that want to imitate it. Or also, I think Averroes argued that since it's responsible for the change of the heavens and it's essential to ether that it changes, it's also responsible for the existence of the ether for of the heavenly bodies. So I mean, Proclus does end up in a very closer to Aristotle than the Stoics. Um, and but I mean he does have and depending on how you read Aristotle, this difference can be bigger or smaller.
Hmm. Okay, back to the ethical question. Uh, so providence in the sense of caring for something lower, even if it's your product, like your children, what you would think is like a paradigm case for why people should care about the things that they produce. Everyone here agrees that's bad. You shouldn't care, like if you made a beautiful bike or I don't know, whatever, boat, caring about that would be bad because if anything, the activity of making the boat should be the better thing, if it would be a good thing at all. And the boat would just be like something that happens because you do this great activity of making boats. And happens to be that when you do that great activity, good boats are produced.
Yeah, and yeah, because if you uh if you value the things that you produce, then you know those things can never actually make you a better person, um, because causality is linear. That's basically the idea. And so if you cause them, they can't cause you. That's basically the idea. And the case of children and of, I guess this applies to animals as well, since they have souls. Um, so living beings and things that have souls, if they you can value them precisely because you're not the only producer there. There's also, say, this other soul or something there, that's producing it. And that's also like part of the, like in Plotinus, of course, is not a big deal, but then this is also part of like, oh, well, then why should we care about statues and idols and rituals and all that? And it's like, well, actually, these are things. This is true. You could say these are lower things, fine. But what you actually worship in them or love in them is the God that's producing them, right? And so you're actually trying to unite yourself to the God.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
like
So,
you you can appreciate like, oh, we live in a beautiful world. This is a beautiful sunset, but you should actually be thinking of like, oh, this is a beautiful image of the demiurge. Okay.
okay. So I'm just trying to think like it's just the thing that you producing that seems that I'm getting stuck on because I guess if someone has like an ethics that's all about you should be you, and then if being you isn't like a free choice, like the existentialist thinks, is there something called being a human being? Then loving or caring about things that are lower than what human beings are uh, seems to be not good. But higher things
Yeah.
are good, also unlike what existentialists would think, because of this causality. Because like what you are isn't really determined by you; it's determined by your cause. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, if you love, but assuming that sunsets are lower than human beings, which they're not really, or I'm not sure, uh, then loving them would be wrong. Or, I mean, people are happy to say that it's wrong to care too much about money or about food or whatever. Um,
Right. You
but then if it's something that you created, we feel like you have some kind of responsibility towards that, maybe. Like if you cause something to be, then okay,
um
would you say that's something like, because I mean, and to the extent that you really cause something to be, then you also cause it to continue to be. And that's what we call like the continuing providence. But the problem is that human beings don't actually create things that way usually. We're not responsible for things continuing to be, but we want them to be responsible that way. Like we give warranties on stuff that we make, like I'm going to fix it if it breaks. Although, like, as if I want to be like a real productive cause. Like, I want to be the creator of the table, even though really, like, the wood and the trees and the like universal artisan of tables and all kind of things like that are really responsible for it. I want to pretend to be it, so I'm gonna say, well, I'll fix it if it breaks, and that's like a good thing somehow.
yeah, so this is yeah, so that's a question, like, what's the basis for the responsibility for a product? So I think there is something like, so this is, yeah, the responsibility actually can be derived from this idea that the good of each thing comes from its cause. And so if you're the cause of something, you are also its good. And let's take it the case of the warranty, right? So you've made something like a table or a computer, and then you commit yourself to keeping it in a good state. Like if it breaks, come back and I'll fix it. And there, I mean, it's not that you want to imitate and pretend you're the productive cause. You are actually you are actually the instrument through which, the art produced that, right? The diamond produced that. And then you say, okay, I'm happy to continue being this vessel, this instrument. Um, and so you can be responsible for the things that you produce because you are to some degree the source of their good. And so but you can be responsible for something. But I mean, in order for you to discharge this responsibility, it's important for you to remember that, you are their good. They are not your good. And I think that's the point that's being made here, right? You have to because if you thought that your good was in this table you produced and you love it and so on, well, first of all, you would have very lots of trouble selling this table and making it useful for other people. But let's say we get over that hurdle, then like you might think, oh, the table is damaged, but oh, this might actually be um okay, I'm gonna parody some forms of discourse now. Um, this is actually what the wood is showing us. These are the plastic possibilities of the wood that it can actually lean like that. And we should just, really embrace this way of being of the wood. And it's like, no, you're supposed to fix it because the ideal
Okay.
of the table is in you, it's not in the wood. Right. So that would be the problem.
Hmm. I see. Something like
So
if you're
like the case of children, okay, like so insofar as they are, still children and they're not really rational yet, so they are to that degree perhaps still products of you, and then like you as the fully formed human being should try to educate them and they turn to you as their cause. And you have to understand that you have to in some sense have some idea of how to raise them and what they should be. You can't say, oh, everything they do is beautiful, like and we're just going to accept how they are, right?
right. So basically this idea, right? So responsibility, or which is something like true love for your product, doesn't. We're coming back to this like definition of like turning to or caring about here means really making them the criteria. Either even the criteria for your happiness or something like that. Like, I'm happy if my children are happy. No, you should be caring for your children because maybe that's some part of your responsibility. But not make their happiness or what they think is happiness in the sense of their fake happiness,
Yeah,
the criteria for your happiness, because that is actually the opposite of responsibility. Responsibility is also a linear thing, right? It doesn't mean caring for what you think. It means caring for what I think. It's authoritarian. I mean, it's top-down thing.
yeah,
Uh, or the same thing about any kind of thing. Like if we say, my body is the product of my soul or something like that. Yes, you should
right,
care about your body, which means make it work and make it better. But it doesn't mean making that the source of the soul, because that would be upside down, like the source of your
So
happiness or something like that, or the criteria.
yeah, so I guess this is like it's even in some sense a more Neoplatonic example, indeed. So the soul is responsible for the life of the body, right? The body is only alive because of this image of soul in it, and so you have to make the body more like the soul. And so if the soul is this inherently living thing that's always active and so on, then you have to make the body like that. And so remember, like Porphyry says that it's a feature, he quotes this as something that's virtuous about Plotinus, that he sleeps very lightly, right? Because he's constantly thinking. And so that's like an idea that, the good body is the body that is in some sense always active, whereas you shouldn't be like a soul that says, wow, this sleep thing is just like fantastic. I should really take narcotics, like I'm sleeping all the time. And that would be like taking the body's state, which is to sleep, to be inert, and so on. Um, or also like if you just focus on making your body big and spacious, right? Either be it because you're bodybuilding and or because you're just eating a lot of food or something. All these would also, I think, be ways for the Neoplatonists that you are, in some sense, not making the body a healthy thing, a living, active thing, and so taking the soul as its model, but rather you're taking what's proper to bodies, extension as the model, right? So extension or strength. Um, and yep. Plotinus frequently has these images as of like if bodies themselves could do things, then you know tiny things couldn't have so much power, like poison or seeds or words, right? These tiny things, they have lots of power, and this is like one of the rhetorical tropes he uses to get readers to think, oh, incorporeal things are actually, and incorporeal powers are why anything happens, really.
Hmm.
Um, and and so yeah, any focus on extension or physical strength would be seen perhaps as negative.
Okay.
Um, okay, so shall we continue?
Yeah, back to the evil. Okay, so that's evil. Now, evil, it should be specified. This is where we are, basically.
Mhm. Yeah.
Evil, it should be specified, is of a double nature. First, to unite oneself with inferior entities, which is what we're talking about now. And secondly, to do so with an excess of passion. That's a second thing. And now,
Right.
so I'm not sure what that second thing is. Oh, he's going to explain. This is why the civic virtues, even though they deliver the soul from one level of evil, are nonetheless judged to be virtues and are held in honor, while the purificatory virtues are counted more worthy of honor as delivering the soul also from the evil that is proper to it as soul. So he's saying, uh, it would be one kind of evil to like be to have an excess of passion, which is not an evil of being united to lower things. It's not even talking about the soul. It's talking about the virtue sort of proper to the maybe to those passions themselves. Like it's not good for those passions to be an excess. And that is what civic virtues are about, which is like not being too angry or things like that. Um, but the purificatory virtues are about what we're just discussing about the idea of the soul at all caring about the lower things. Is that
Right. And I think we can like see these two vices, these two evils, in a more connected way. So you can think of the excess of passion as a as something that can only happen once you're already united with the body or with your products. So, for instance, if if you overreact to someone and you think you're really offended, and then you just let yourself be taken by your anger and hit them or something, or whatever way you overreact, Then there you have done two things. On the one hand, you are uniting yourself with something that you, in some sense, do create, like your own self-image, right? Your own narcissism or something like that, and your honor. And on, but on the other hand, you've gone one step further because it's not even anymore you who's controlling the activity, right? It's like that person said something that caused almost like a mechanical response of your anger, and then you just followed your anger and you hit them or something like that. So the Whereas, so like the civic virtues involve you taking control and you like setting limits and saying, no, right, the proper response to this offense is like just to say, um, I'm sorry, you're out of line or something like that. And the purificatory thing is then to say, um, not is then not only to just control that, have a controlled reaction, but in some sense try to uh, not have any reaction at all, right? Because you just say my self-image, that's just like yeah, it's just like a product of my own imagination, and I'm not going to try to affect it or anything. It's not me. Um, so that a soul that's like that would maybe react and say, um, like would just have like this internal conversation, like, "Oh, my inner monkey is offended. Isn't it funny?" I don't know. Um, the that would be so. Those are like the two stages of the
So it's
soul.
like two stages of the same kind of evil. Since so he wants evil, I mean, we could have two things. We could have evil be defined I mean, before, like just for in the political, civil sense, civic sense, then evil is like the being out of control because it would lead to further bodily problems and things like that. Here he is saying there is also, this is really explaining how these civic virtues are helpful, are held in honor, something like that, worthy of honor, also from the perspective of evil, of the Neoplatonic definition of evil, which is uniting yourself to the lower thing, because it's like a double issue, a double problem of uniting yourself and being um, controlled or being excessively, what do you call it? Excessively passionate about the lower things.
Yeah. So yeah, so like you're certainly not going to be able to stop being united to the lower things if they control you. So the first step isn't for them not to control you, and then the second step is n not to unite with them.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
but the because is really something we only add here because in the civic sense you could just say you should not be have excessive anger because you want to have friends or something like that.
right, exactly. Yeah, that's a kind of um, of, of civic argument. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
shall I continue?
Now let's continue. It is requisite then that once purified, and this is going back to the second step that we're here. Once purified, the soul unites itself with what has engendered it, and in consequence, the virtue that is proper to it after its conversion consists in the acquaintance and knowledge of being, not because it does not possess in itself, but it is not capable of seeing what is within itself without the cooperation of what is superior to it.
Right. So beyond purifying, you have to turn yourself to the higher things, but and to know being, right? So beyond purifying yourself, you have to exercise contemplation. And then he's making this point that of course, He's following this theory of anamnesis. So you don't learn things from outside, you only learn them from inside. But it's not that the soul doesn't, so it's not that the soul doesn't have the knowledge within itself, but it's rather it's only because nous illuminates the soul that it does have all this knowledge inside it, right?
Hmm. So, so this is going back to the like most important original question of why do we have purification plus knowledge, let's call it here. And
Yeah.
it's like somehow there's a problem because you do have the knowledge in yourself, but you do need the higher thing to
Yeah.
illuminate it. So in some
Right.
sense, like someone who would say you only need purification is sort of correct. Or like there's these
No,
steps are very close to each other.
yes. That the steps are close to each other is certain. But so go back to the question about like, is purification enough? Well, it would be enough if we were intrinsically good, but we're just potentially good. So that potential good is also the potential knowledge of the forms we have in us, right? Remembering like the Socratic thesis that if you're that wisdom is the central virtue, and that if you have wisdom, if you know what to do, then you have all the virtues. So the thing that we're not naturally good, we're not intrinsically good, is because it's not that we have a perfect knowledge that's then just obscured by the body. We have a perfect potential for knowledge or a potential for perfect knowledge. And so that's why it's not enough to just separate yourself from the body. You also have to turn towards the um, active knowledge, which is nous. Right?
So it's maybe something like the way of like actualizing that potential is not by purification, but by something positive. Although
Right.
it's
And this
not
is
like a something being created, that is something that you already have.
Yeah. So this is where he's separating himself from Stoic ethics. So Stoics, they do have stuff about purification. They do have stuff about saying you shouldn't, it's not just that you shouldn't eat too much or that you should be angry in the right proportion. When you feel that pain of, of I'm offended, you should just, see that as you should separate yourself and say, oh, that's not something under my control. That's not me, right? So you shouldn't take the pains and pleasures as reports of what's good and bad. And so they do have this purificatory moment where the soul is just supposed to turn in on itself and concentrate on what can it do on its own. But this is Plotinus's critique. They have then no substance to do. Like, what is the soul supposed to actually do when it's separated itself from everything? Rather, insofar as they do have an answer, it's, oh, study the natural world, do physics. And then Plotinus says, but that's just that is the realm of conflict and passion that you're trying to avoid. And so he says, no, what you have to complement your separating yourself from everything and thinking about your own mind and paying attention to your own reactions is that you have to also like uh, do Platonism. You have to also study the
Hmm.
forms. So
I
yeah.
see. Okay. Yeah. Okay. There is where are we? There is therefore the Stoics like would say something like the physics of the all is different from the physics of the part, and therefore it's better or something like
Something like that. And the Platonist would be unimpressed.
that. There is therefore, so this is the conclusion. There's another class of virtues, a third one, after the purificatory and the civic, which is that of the soul as it is acting intellectually. Okay, now we have to discuss all the virtues. So at this level, wisdom, both theoretical and practical, consists of the contemplation of the contents of intellect. That's not very practical again, but okay. Um, Justice is the fulfilling by each of the parts of the soul of the role proper to it and following upon intellect and directing its activity towards intellect. Okay. Moderation is the internal conversion of the soul towards intellect. And courage is detachment from passions through which the soul assimilates itself to that towards which it turns its gaze, which is itself free from passions. And by the way, all these are reciprocally implicated, as are the early ones too. So here he's saying these are all the same thing. Not exactly. They're
Or
reciprocally
if you have
implicated.
one, you have all of them. Yeah. So again, okay, so in what sense is this practical? And also in what sense, for instance, is it distinct from the purificatory versions? So I think let's start with courage, because the courage in the purificatory is kind of I think it's like uh the clearest there, because like the courage of the purificatory level is I don't care if I die because death is not something about me, right? So you just have no fear of death. Um and the You have no fear of death. Here, courage isn't about having no fear of death, but rather it's assimilating yourself to nous. So I think courage here is like you have to have the courage of, as it were, becoming something that might seem inhuman, might seem not like a soul, right? And so that involves a kind of courage. The fear here is of, I guess, so like once the soul frees itself from the body, it might have a different fear, right? It might have the fear of disappearing because it's going to become this soulless static thing, right? Which is nous. And of course, courage is knowing that no, nous itself is alive. Nous is actually what is most alive. It's source of the soul's life. So you should, ignore this fear that you're dying when you're assimilating yourself to what to nous, right? And so that's this courage to assimilate to what is higher, right? Um, and then all of these virtues here are about this assimilation. So to go back to the first thing, um, the practical wisdom. So in the previous two, let me. So in the previous two, he only mentioned practical wisdom. So he only mentioned phronesis, and this is the first time that he mentions Sophia, right? Which is here called interpreted as theoretical wisdom. So, and I talked about like in the civic practical wisdom is, being able to balance things, calculate things, deliberate. And the purificatory practical wisdom is still practical wisdom because you're still like knowing how to act and picking different things. Um, Here, it's also theoretical wisdom. So it's also knowledge and it's the contemplation of the contents uh of intellect. And so I guess here the idea is yeah, so like you're no longer even uh say contemplating different choices of action. You are just contemplating uh nous or the forms. You're just doing philosophy. I guess it's still practical in the sense that you're choosing to do philosophy at the all the time, um, instead of other things. And so it's like it's how what does that mean to do philosophy all the time? It means like in every situation you are, you think of its universal import, right? You think of um and so for instance, if like the purificatory person can run into a temptation and they can, for instance, be invited to a party with lots of dancing and so on, and they have to, and then the purificatory thing is to say, ah, who cares about eating and drinking? But the contemplative thing to do is like, ah, okay, so this is a situation in the world. You know, there are parties. What's the function of parties? And you know, what is this art? What is this archetypal situation of like the wise man invited to a party? What does that mean? Maybe I'll go home and write and write the symposium. Um, so um,
Right. So
uh,
the main thing, if we like go with this like language of like the purificatory being something like negative or more like deleting things, and the contemplative being like something positive, like adding something, would be something like I don't remember how he's called it earlier, but something like the purificatory virtue of wisdom. He said not sharing opinions with the body, and here
yeah.
it's thinking or like actually thinking. Well, we could call it practical in the sense of like, well, sort of there's still something negative in the sense of like, well, what do I do with my time? Something like I don't. Well, the previous thing doesn't tell you what to do; it just tells you what not to do, and this one tells you what to do. So like, you should always be thinking or thinking about that thing. That's what you were saying. But
Yeah,
point is that.
yeah, not sharing opinions with the body. So it would be like, yeah, you don't. The body says, "Oh, parties are good and fun and so on," and you just say, "Yeah, whatever, body." And whereas this one is like, you have your own source of opinions for judging what parties are, right? And it's like you have your own
Okay.
source. And like because the purificatory is so empty, it's you know, it's really hard to conceive of it really happening without also some contemplative virtue. When Proclus tries to give some content to it, he says that um like there's a specific kind of science which is proper to the purificatory, which is mathematics, because you're just like, as it were, he doesn't believe in abstraction, but you're just, you know, mathematical entities are in some sense just this world with less information, right? So maybe the purificatory thing would be to just react to this as like a, an intellectual puzzle or something, whereas the contemplative thing is then to think of do a more full-bodied philosophical appreciation of it. I mean, if here I'm pulling in some proclus that we'll read later, just so that we can have a
I
maybe
see.
imagine
Yeah.
what purification would be without contemplation. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we don't have to. Well, we don't like really need it to be like a stage that exists, but it could be something that like has specific like thoughts or practices belonging to it. Something like
Right.
I don't know, like
Yeah.
fasting is a kind of purification, but it doesn't help you think, or may as long as you're not using it to think, then it's not
Yeah.
contemplation, but it might help you in something like that.
Yeah. Okay, so we did courage and we did
Uh,
the
Not,
wisdom.
yeah,
So then again, yeah, justice is now the soul turning towards intellect. So, you know, justice uh in the purificatory was just the soul acting on its own. Whereas here, um, the right justice is the result of reason and intellect dominating the soul with nothing to oppose them. Um, Here is the fulfilling by each of the parts of the soul the role proper to it in following upon intellect and directing its activity towards intellect. And and so here, intellect is something higher than soul. And so again, it's we have this multiplicity, you add something, and so you can talk about like justice being obeying intellect as something separate from soul. So that would be what you would call something like living your philosophy, living your theory, right? Doing, following your imagination and your appetites should follow what your contemplation has determined the reality is. And moderation is the internal conversion of the soul uh, towards intellect. That seems to be um, more of the same. Although I guess this internal conversion, um, right, so yeah, moderation seems to be as it were, the first. So actually, the Greek is strophe, so it's just the turning of the soul. So first, the soul has to turn towards intellect. I guess that's like the basis of the whole thing. And then once it's turned towards it, it will do what it tells it. Right. So it's like, and what is this initial turning? I guess it's something like the fact that it likes contemplation. Right. Um, and then the courage is then, to have the courage to do what intellect says, not be afraid that you're dying as a soul. Um,
Hmm.
okay, we discussed
Okay.
the four.
Yeah,
We
more or
can,
less. I can't find the previous good for, yeah, and the purificatory said courage. Moderation is, yeah, it's like in the most general sense, we're saying all the things we said before, but in a positive way. Like instead of saying moderation is not being caring about the passions, now it's the turning towards intellect. Which with problem is that moderation seems to be something that is related to the passions always. So it's very hard to say it in a positive way, for example. Moderation and courage, the
right.
first two, I guess, are easier.
Yes, yeah, the moderation is the toughest one. That's why I mean, I gloss it as this like taste or liking for intellectual activity or something like that.
Hmm.
Yeah. Fourth?
Okay, so now the fourth class, and this is the third three classes of virtue. Now the fourth class. The fourth class of virtues is that of the paradigmatic, which are, as we agree, actually to be found in the intellect, seeing as they are superior to those of the soul and are paradigms of those. What does it mean it's found in the intellect other than it's found in the soul?
So in it seems so in Plotinus, this meant that they weren't virtues at all, right? They're just the features of nous, of intellect, that all the virtues of soul are just images of. And it's an innovation of Porphyry's to be more schematic and call these things also virtues.
Okay. At this level, intellect is that in which the paradigms enjoy a simultaneous existence. So now I'm not sure I understand what this virtue is, anyways. But he's giving the four things now. What counts as practical wisdom is understanding, while theoretical wisdom is the intellect. So now here's a difference in practical and theoretical. Something counts as practical wisdom, which is understanding. Theoretical wisdom is the intellect and the act of knowing. Um, Moderation becomes self-concentration. Performance of its proper act is just minding its own business. Courage is self-identity and remaining purely on its own, owing to the superabundance of its power. Okay, I'm gonna need
Right.
to go back
Yeah.
to the first.
So Um, yeah, I think it's easier to understand how, like, I think discussing these four or five virtues in intellect will help us understand how they are originals, of which the virtues of the soul are copies. So let's start with the last one again. Let's start with courage. So he's saying that courage is in intellect is the fact that intellect is identical with itself and it remains itself and it doesn't mix with its effects because it just produces them through superabundance of power, right? Superabundance. So it produces things like um, like how the sun illuminates the world. So the sun is just light, and because it's in the heavens, then all the heavens are lit up. So and that's also how intellect produces, and Plotinus calls this um its courage. So this courage is supposed to be then the model for the courage for the other three forms of courage: the civic, the purificatory, and the contemplative. So the contemplative, we can perhaps understand if the contemplative courage is the courage that the soul has to um, assimilate itself to nous, then, well, the original of that in nous, you might think actually that it would be something like nous's assimilation to the good, right? Nous is attaching itself to the good. But that's not what he says. He says that it's that the original here is the intellect being itself and producing it and producing similarity from itself without paying attention to it. So this is actually something that we saw in Proclus's theory of causality, when he says that likeness is the cause both of precession and of reversion. And and so the likeness that the effect seeks by returning to its cause and becoming like its cause has its ground in the intellect's or the original's ability to have copies of it made, right? So it has this ability of being an original, right? This capacity to be an original. And so this isn't a um, you know, it seems too much to say that this is a case of original and copy, but rather it's a case of ground and grounded. So the ability to assimilate yourself to something is grounded in that thing's capacity to be assimilated to. And so that's what the so if the contemplative courage is the capacity of the soul to assimilate itself to intellect, then that corresponds in intellect to intellect's being itself and producing copies of itself, right? Through the superabundance of power. Now, that's with regard to the contemplative. Now, with regard to the purificatory, we see a more of a um, image original um, relation because purificatory virtue is, I'm completely cut off from the body and from all bodily things. I don't care if I die or not. And similarly, um, the intellect's courage is its production of other things just by being itself. And so again, not being bound by anything below it. So here we see how um, the soul is to the body as intellect is to the soul and the body. And so the same independence that the soul in purificatory virtue shows towards the body, intellect shows towards all things. And so here there's a clearer um
Again, in the
so in the um there's a proportion that the same way that the intellect is independent of everything below it, the soul in purificatory virtue tries to be independent of the things below it.
Oh, okay. Right, right.
Yeah. And then the civic case, so civic virtue is just having a measured thumos, right? There he just says that andria perito thumumen non. So it's just having um that in the case of thumos, like having um, measured affections in the case of thumos. Um, I guess there, well, the courage. I mean, the courage we can see it with regard to death, right? So, this even the civic courage is what allows people sometimes to face death, and they can face death because like they care more about the praise of reason and the praise of what wise people will say about them than um than sustaining their own desire for bodily integrity or food or drink or something like that. And so also in this case the um uh courage is something that can separate us uh, from some other desires, even if it doesn't separate us from the body itself as such. And so that's how, for instance, how courage, um, the paradigmatic courage is a paradigm for the other three. It's more clear a paradigm for the purificatory and the civic. There we can see how civic civic courage is something that partially separates us from some desires, and then purificatory courage separates us from all things, the or from all bodily things, and intellect and paradigmatic courage is what separates intellect from everything else, from all lower things. The um the contemplative courage is less clear unless we think of the contemplative courage as what separates the soul from itself, right? So we have separation from some bodies is a partial image. Separation from body itself is a bigger, better image. The soul separate from itself and identified with intellect is an even better image. But then, and these are all images of this of intellect separation from all lower things. And so in that way, and that's the sense in which these features of intellect are paradigms for the virtues of the soul. Um, so I just took us through courage to see this. Do you want to do it with the other three as well?
Wait, one sec. One thing before. Um, Plotinus talked about the idea of all virtues being measures, and that's how uh the like structure of nous or something is a paradigm for that. That's not.
Yeah. So the that was one Platinian argument where he already introduced this paradigm in the case when he discussed civic virtue. And and he said, and that was also a reason for him not to call those things virtues, because he said, there's one thing which is he compared fashioning your life, like bringing your passions under control, with building a house, right? And so you have the art of house building, which puts order and measure on all these in principle disorganized things. There's rock over there, and there's water over there, and there's concrete over there, and there's sand over there, and there's wood over there, and then you bring them all and you organize them into a house. And you do that according to like the ideal model of a house that you have in you. And you wouldn't say and so you wouldn't say that this house in you is measured. So it doesn't have measures in the sense of things that give order to some kind of mass because there's no material here, right? And therefore, since it's not measured, it's not virtuous, right? Um, so also we can and so uh, uh, Porphyry is saying, we can also call those measures in a different sense, right? And so here are measures, those are measures. Um, he disagrees with Plotinus about being so particular about not calling the thing a virtue, but we can bring that here as well. So, for instance, the let's go back. Let's apply this to the courage example that I worked out just now. So, the courage of civic courage is applying a certain measure to your passions, to your and specifically, it's applying a certain measure to the passions of thumos, so to do with honor and offense, right? Your self-image. And what is that? What is the measure that you are applying? The measure is that it should not be subordinated to the lower things, right? So in this case, your courage, your self-image should not take into account, like should not be swayed by um the appetites. It should be swayed by reason, right? It's like what it's the praise of wise people is what should be really important to you. And this what is actually the paradigmatic case of this separation? What is the measure that you're applying it? It's actually the separation of nous from all lower things, right? So that's a way that we can use the Platinian uh, talk of measure and the distinction between the embodied measure and the ideal measure to understand how these virtues are paradigms. Right.
Hmm.
Does that help?
Yeah, but what's his name? Porphyry is not really talking about measure. He's not his
Well, he's mentioned measure, but he hasn't he just didn't use the measure talk in this paragraph.
hmm.
But the when he introduces civic okay, it's disappeared in the translation. But when he says the civic virtues, based as they are on moderation of the passions is measure of the passions,
Mm.
metriopateia. There's the word metron is in there.
Okay.
And yeah, and actually moderate like measuring the passions is actually better than moderation because, for instance, civic virtue can oblige you to be like you actually have to be more angry here than you naturally would. Right? So like we're gonna fight this enemy, we need to really win this so that the city is safe, and so you have to be actually absolutely angry against these people. Right?
Mm.
Yeah.
So um intellect. Okay. Yeah, now we have to talk about all the other ones though. Intellect and wisdom and moderation and stuff.
Right. There's an interesting thing here where he talks about that there's something which is like phronesis. And he distinguishes phronesis and Sophia here. So he ran both of them together in the contemplative virtues, right? He said both of them are just acting according to nous, right? Or the um, right. The And here he says that phronesis, so what translates as practical wisdom, is understanding, episteme, and Sophia is the nous in the activity of knowing. Um, what are those? things. Um, so mm, I would think that the episteme, the nous of uh, the episteme of nous, the knowledge of nous, that would probably something be like that the forms are established in it, something like that. Whereas Sophia, the contemplative activity, is that it's the intellect is entirely in act. Um, so that's like how I would understand these two expressions. Now, there's a question about why are they images of the things? The so the fruit having the forms, including the forms in yourself, is an image possibly of deliberation because it's it's the way that there's multiplicity in intellect, right? So, and you can think maybe that like proper deliberation is being able to see all the possibilities and then appropriately ranking them in you. And that's how the forms are in Nous, right? They're not just side by side, but they have all the, you know, relations like that. Animal is more universal than man, right? Than human being. So, so this containment of all the forms in intellect is an organized containment, and that's maybe the model for deliberation, right? Something like that. And whereas Sophia, which only appeared in the in the level of contemplative virtues, which is actually engaging in contemplation of the forms, is then the fact that all these forms in intellect are entirely in act, right? And so we can there we can see I think there the likenesses is less a problem is less a problem. The original for our activity of knowing the forms is the activity of the forms themselves, making themselves known, right? um so that's this curious distinction between practical and theoretical wisdom in nous. Now, moderation, so for Zune, is he says it's turning towards itself. And so self-concentration. So this is that thing that, what does nous know? What does it make known? Just itself, right? It's identical with the forms in itself. So this is its turning towards itself. Um, in in the case of So I think we can see how this is like the measure applied in civic virtue, because in civic virtue, what moderation with regard to the appetites is like you don't let yourself be taken away by the appetites, but you think like what is actually best for me. So you turn towards yourself, right? Um, and that's actually the turning of these appetites towards the true self, the rational self. Um, so it's instead of letting the appetites actually, as it were, walk and act independent of your other desires and beliefs, you unite your desires and beliefs. You do you choose how to eat and drink and so on, taking into account, you know, everything you know and valuing most the um what reason tells you. That already includes part of justice, but again, that's why the all the virtues imply each other. In the case of the purificatory, well, the purificatory is all about turning towards yourself. So in a sense, there's moderation in all of it, but the um how did he say moderation is the result of taking care not to assent to any of the passions, right? So it's not just not sharing the opinions, but not assenting to them. So not following their actions. And again, uh this is a form of turning towards yourself. Although since turning towards yourself is rather something positive, it would be this part of turning towards yourself that the intellect does not turn towards lower things. And the yeah, in the contemplative level, moderation was this turning towards intellect. So the model of turning towards intellect is intellect's own turning towards itself. Um, so that's moderation. That's the self-concentration. Is that okay?
Okay, yeah.
And performance of its proper act is just minding its own business. Uh, and the um, they have yeah, minding its own business. So that just seems to be a repetition. So, I mean, the doing its own act is another formulation for justice, of course. And I think this has to do with that what nous does is just what it is, right? Its activity is just, contemplating itself and therefore uh, producing something else. And you can think of that as a model for justice in in the civic sense is like each person should just do their own job. And so just the same way that the sun shines and fire heats and intellect illuminates, so also the teacher should teach and the policeman should be a policeman and that, each person in their profession should as it were, just be that profession and then naturally do what follows from that profession. In the purificatory case, he defined justice as um, practical wisdom. Justice is the result of reason and intellect dominating the soul with nothing to oppose them. So again, reason and intellect here would be the proper activity of the soul, and when the soul is alone, without anything, without following the body in any way, then it's just going to follow reason and intellect. And in the contemplative thing, it's the following intellect in all things. So again, yeah, so if intellect's um, justice is it just doing what it is, then the contemplative virtue, which is the virtue of assimilating yourself to intellect, is just following what intellect is doing. Um, and after justice, we have courage, which is what we started out with.
Mhm.
Um, okay, so we've done the four models of the four paradigms of virtue in intellect. So these are um, again, Plotinus would not call them virtues. Porphyry does, and Porphyry, but anyway, whether you call them virtues or not, they're the features of what intellect is that the soul is imitating when it acquires the virtues. Right.
Right, but these are also
And we
not things
saw
that
that
you do,
actually,
right?
right, these are not things that any human being does. Right? and and also you can say that they're things that intellect does because they're activities, right? Because intellect is entirely an act. But um and also we saw that the case of the civic and the purificatory, we can maybe understand more um how there's a case of image and copy, Whereas it's not so much that the contemplative virtues are copies of the paradigms, but they are the assimilating yourself to the paradigm. Right. So
Right, it's like the counterpart
yeah, yeah.
because of contemplation sort of being becoming nous.
Yeah. So it's not that the contemplative virtues are copies of nous, rather they are of the originals in nous. They are the activity of becoming a copy. Whereas the cases of the civic and the purificatory, it is really more like a copy in a different area, right? A copy in a different situation.
Right. And therefore we don't need like there's nothing there isn't a fourth level to achieve sort of.
No, not here. We're going to come across later um, a weird expression that might suggest that, but it seems to be that in Porphyry there it's not a further level, but later in other Neoplatonists will see that there is a further level to achieve, and it is called paradigmatic. And and remember, in Plotinus, there were these things that you can become a daimon, and that might be becoming like nous, but you can even become a god, and there are like many levels there. So there's a space for expanding further levels of achievement. We'll see a bit about what Porphyry does with that here.
Okay. And we also don't have things like what's it called? Like theurgy.
We don't have theurgy yet, unless you can count, like Zeke Mazur argued that some things in Plotinus should count as theurgy. Like he has these thought experiments where nous, like he says, imagine this, go think this, and then nous will come to you. And he says, well, that's like an internal ritual. But no, there's no theurgy in the sense of using material objects and rites in order to achieve some divine or moral result. Um, so yeah, that was 12. That was an hour and a half.
Yeah, we're done.
So we'll continue next class on page 185 with so then it has become clear that there are four classes
Hmm.
of virtues.
Yes.
Okay. Great. This was fun.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.
See you. Bye bye.